I just finished speaking with Dave Calleja. He's the head of design at Isobar in Melbourne, and before his head of design role, Dave led the experimentation practice at Isobar. So he's got deep expertise in hypothesis-led experimentation, and he's well practiced at educating clients and building experimentation cultures. So here's our conversation. All right. So maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about what your role is at Isobar.
Yeah, absolutely. So my role, as of quite recently actually, is head of design for Melbourne and Perth. And so the way that we structure that is there's two heads of design. In fact, there's two heads of everything, delivery, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Thank you. And I share that responsibility nationally with the head of design for Sydney and Canberra, and we work very closely together. And our joint responsibility is to look after the growth and the capability of design nationally through all of Isobar Australia. And then specifically my role is looking after the projects and the team members and the capability within Melbourne and Perth, and supporting projects, working out what the senior members of those teams need in order to deliver the best of our client work, and sort of moving between as I said, that national view and that what we patch view, and then making sure that design is the best that it can be at Isobar, which is something that I'm very proud of.
Yeah. Okay. Sharif spoke very highly of the experimentation practice. Is this relatively new? How long has that been going for?
So it's not. I wouldn't say it's new. I would say that it's continuing to evolve. Like I think most good capabilities. It's definitely something that I've been passionate about since I started at Isobar, and really started to get a lot of notice through, as you mentioned, Sharif, through the work that we were doing with Jetstar and with Qantas and Anthalage and Holden. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that was that they were organisations who had an immediate ROI on conducting that kind of work, and also had the scale to be able to do it, and the technology in place. Because that's not to say that you need to be an airline or an automotive company in order to be able to experiment. In fact, there's many times where being smaller, it's easier to start experiment because you don't have legacy, you don't have existing ways of doing things. You're naturally trying to do new things because you might be a new business, a startup. You might naturally be trying to do something new, so you're in that headspace already, which I'm sure we can talk about in further detail. But what they did have was the ability to realize those benefits at scale, and that was really important to getting buy-in and continued support. That being said, it was something that still took years to establish, and I'm really proud of where we got it to. But the market in the Australian market is significantly behind compared to the market in Europe and in the US. They just have a lot more capability and a lot more maturity, and a lot more runs on the board in terms of running experimentation programs. Not necessarily holistic experimentation, but certainly things like A/B testing and sort of things that we would consider to be part of that world.
Yeah. Okay. Is there like a gold standard or like a company that you'd look to model your practice around in particular?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in terms of local organisations, I think you need to look to people like Atlassian. You need to look to people like the Big Four banks. These are organisations that have really embraced some of those more quantitative aspects of experimentation. Things like scaled personalisation and A/B testing. And in terms of global gold standards, I think you don't need to look much further than tried and tested names like Netflix and Amazon. Anyone who's really involved with commerce, those are organisations that are really living and breathing experimentation as a mindset every day, and not just in things like visual A/B testing. Netflix is a great example because they've published a lot of literature where they're talking about how they've experimented with different ways of deploying code or different ways of running the teams. Spotify has done a lot of fantastic work with audio personalization, which I would consider any type of personalization to be an experiment, because inherently what you're doing is you're having some kind of insight, some kind of hypothesis, you're using that to change the experience in a meaningful way, and then you're understanding whether or not that's had an impact on behavior. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't have to be, I think a lot of the time what we see, particularly in this market or lower maturity kind of organizations, is that there's an association that experimentation means A/B testing. Yeah. And whilst A/B testing is an incredibly powerful way to be able to conduct an experiment, it is certainly not the be-all, and it's just a validation technique. It's not, the whole picture.
Okay, so where did you start then with the practice? What were some of the first methods that you were using?
So I think one of the first things, certainly was, online ABX testing in order to understand and really to remove opinion from the room. And I think that's really important, because one of the reasons that I'm really passionate about it is, whilst I think that all ideas can be good ideas and everybody should have a voice. And in fact, I think that experimentation can help democratize ideas and stop it from being, Ronnie Kahabi, who's like a godfather of kind of A/B testing experimentation. X is now at Airbnb, but X, Microsoft, X, Amazon, etc. He coined the term HIPPO, highest paid person's opinion, which you may be familiar with. In fact, I learned the term at Sportsbet all those years ago. And I think that's really important, because what you're trying to do there is remove subjective decision making in an organization. And the reason that happens is lack of data. There's a term, and I'm going to butcher the saying here, but if you give me data, I can use that. If we're just going to go with opinions, I'll use mine. In other words, if you force stakeholders or you force people, members on the project, to just go with what they think is best, but because there's no alternative, that alternative being rationale, clear data, hypotheses that are well formed. Yeah. Everyone's, naturally people are going to gravitate towards those things, because it's, in most circumstances, let's just go with most circumstances. But if you've got just, I think this is best, and my bum's on the line because I'm the senior member of the team, so if something goes wrong, I'm going to be responsible, I might as well go with my idea then. Yeah. And there's a lot of nuance there, psychological safety and people having trust in other team members, etc. But ultimately, if you don't have a foundation in solid data and an insight to make decisions and rationale, then that's really where it comes from. So that was a long way of me saying, that's why we started with things like A/B testing, but also with creating different versions of experiences to take through things like usability testing and concept testing and a lot of qualitative offline to understand how people are reacting to those things, because they're inherently less risky. You've spent less time creating like a high fidelity clickable prototype than you have building and deploying that. And particularly in an organization which isn't used to deploying things which haven't been approved, because if you have to, and when I say approved, that's not that you just throw any shit, onto the site, but it is inherently a lower kind of iteration cycle in an experimentation pipeline than there is in, a long form project. It's not going through multiple rounds of stakeholders. You have to give people the room. Otherwise you're not going to have any kind of real testing velocity. Yeah. And that can make people really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can understand that. So when you start then, was there already an appreciation for this approach, or was there like a fundamental shift in the way that you're approaching things to get people on board with it?
No, I think that, looking back sort of 5 to 10 years ago, there wasn't really an appreciation of the value of this. I think there was still predominantly, not just in the Australian landscape, but predominantly, there was pockets where people were proving the value of this kind of work. But largely it was driven by the senior member of the team made a decision, whether that be the creative director or the product owner or, the CEO. Somebody was making a decision about what was going to happen. It was their way or the highway, and that was what went live. And if it worked, they were geniuses, and if it didn't, then there was probably a problem with the media buy. And I'm being incredibly facetious, but that was kind of it. Like that was the problem, and it wasn't based on what can we learn, how can we learn as quickly as possible. I think that something that's always jarring for people is ultimately we want to do the least amount of work possible to validate our decisions and then move on with insight. And that doesn't mean being lazy. That means being, smart and being efficient with what we're doing. so that we can we can go the least amount of time without understanding the decisions or understanding with the work that we're doing and its effectiveness.
Yeah. Okay. Did you recognize any clear phases of maturity growth?
Yeah, I think when for me personally, and the work that we're able to do with some of those clients over the last sort of 4 to 5 years, starting from having to convince people that it was okay to have multiple approaches to things and find out which version works, and that didn't diminish their idea. That was allowing their idea to have oxygen, because ultimately the previous method was we choose one way and we hope that it works. Now it's let's investigate a number of options, and changing the mindset from stakeholders within some of these organizations coming into a room and saying, this, I know my customers, or I know this business because I've been here for 20 years, or whatever version of that I know, moving that from an I know to, hey, I've got this idea, or I've spoken to these people, let's go and test this. Let's go and find out if this is true, or let's go and find out if this works. And having the people from, not the project team, but from other parts of the organization saying, hey, can we find out if this is true, or I've heard this, and can we go and test this together? That's not tied to A/B testing or any particular validation approach. That's a mindset shift that starts from I might have an insight, I might have a way to solve this problem, but I don't know until we validated it. And putting yourself and having the openness to go and say, let's go and find out if it's true, and if it's not, that's a good thing, because now we don't have to spend time and resource and money chasing a rabbit hole that isn't valuable to us.
Yeah. I think like truly accepting that failure is not a bad thing, and it is learning. It is still difficult for a lot of people to understand, I think.
Yeah.
So has this changed the way, like I'm assuming it's super collaborative with stakeholders because you need their buy-in and support along the way, but has this changed the way that you initiate design work?
Yeah, absolutely. We spend a lot of time talking about providing design rationale, being able to use insights to back up all design decisions, and also being transparent when there aren't, because there are some parts of a website or an app or a digital service that you might not yet have insight for, or might not have good quality, or maybe you have to rely on on competitor analysis, or you haven't done any first party research there, and that's not a failure. That's not a problem. That's an opportunity to go and say, okay, well, do we need to learn about this part of the experience? And because we don't have anything yet, what can we do? What is the right approach that we can take to get insight to inform further design decisions? And that might be starting with something which is purely heuristic. That might be starting with something which is purely, hey, we think this might work based on what we know today, which might be just best practice. But let's now go and validate this together. And it's that same mindset, whether you've got years and years of historical, qualitative and quantitative data, and 100 A/B tests a month on that part of the site, and you've got the richest possible data to inform design decisions. You're still making a decision about what data you've used or what insight you've used to create that hypothesis, versus having none and then going and getting some. And that transparency and that willingness to be to acknowledge that is also really, really important.
Yeah. Okay. So I assume you're looking to experiment in the lowest fidelity possible, right? It's the least amount of effort. So is it expensive? Are you investing a lot of resources into building different variants and stuff, or do you have any?
Yeah, well, look, I'm going to show my age slightly, but I think it's incredibly exciting to be designing these days. When I first started and we were using Flash and Photoshop and bits of fireworks and maybe some balsamic or something like that, or some Actia. It was really hard to get to a level of fidelity that was inherently testable with customers who didn't have design maturity to see through wireframes. Whereas you can get to a level of fidelity right now and put it into people's hands. You can come up with an idea in the morning as a team these days, and have that in the hands, a clickable prototype, a usable version, a proxy for that experience, in people's hands in hours, certainly within the day. Various different versions of Google Design Sprint approaches have proven that time and time again, and certainly you can kind of distill that down to a day if you've got the design operations to support that. You've got the right tooling, the processes, the confidence, and sort of the ways of working to go, I wonder if this is a thing. And you could, particularly if you're an organization that's got the ability to deploy that to a live site, you come up with an idea and be testing that in a live site with thousands of users on the day, let alone offline or usability testing or concept testing or something like that. So that's a way of saying no. I don't think it has to be expensive at all. It doesn't. It can be. In fact, we talk about the minimum amount of kind of cross functionality you need to really experiment in a wide range of circumstances, being some technology, some engineering, that could be one person, some design, and some data or insights, whether that be strategy or a data analyst or someone who's responsible for, and obviously different people wear different hats. I'm certainly not saying that designers can't be, insight aware people, or that developers can't be part of, coming up with a design solution. But in terms of people responsible for those three corners of that triangle, you can, and in fact, Booking.com famously had hundreds of teams in their experimentation practice, which were made up of essentially like a product owner, but like a feature owner, some design and some technology. So 3 people, hundreds of teams, hundreds of these little squads working, and that's the way that they ran the practice, incredibly effectively, global pandemics notwithstanding.
Yeah. Okay. Have you found that there's like do you have like a high level framework or a process map, or are you able to talk about that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So something that we've continued to understandably, I guess, or expectedly iterate on is that we have things. Well, maybe I'll take a step back further. I think first and foremost, in terms of getting, I guess, looping back to a question earlier, and getting organisations and going through those motions, is we've spent a lot of time developing training for the clients and for the teams that we work with. Okay. Things like hypothesis training to say, what does a good hypothesis look like? So sans or kind of agnostic to any technology or tooling. So what does a good hypothesis look like? That includes both qualitative and quantitative. How do you understand who to target that potential experiment to? How do you understand the results of that? What is that? What do you need to learn? How do you make decisions about what type of research or validation technique to use? And so we've run that training with hundreds and hundreds of our clients, hundreds of individual people across our clients. And that's been incredibly successful and incredibly empowering, not just for them in terms of building that capability and that mindset internally, but also then being in a position where they can bring those ideas, because these are people that are in call centers or on the ground in retail stores, or of course as part of the digital and design teams internally, that can now contribute in a consistent language to the whole team in terms of ideas and how do we approach things. Yeah. So that's, I think, really foundational, is how do you get people into that mindset without having to drag them through, it shouldn't be through the lens of a particular technology. It should be with that foundational kind of awareness about why this is valuable and how to give them tools to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. And then, sorry, what was the second part of the question?
So I guess I'm interested in, that speaks to the culture and getting people into the right mindset to approach this work. I'm now thinking about how do you initiate an experimentation project? What's the process? Are there several streams? Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you for reminding me. I'm still halfway through my first coffee. Yeah, so good question. So I think the mindset stuff aside, is we talk about having an implementation step or a phase. Now, whether or not that's at a project, or if we're just helping them actively, say they've come to us, they've help us build out an experimentation capability, there needs to be what we would call an implementation phase. Now, that's I guess you could call it a sprint zero or a preparation step, whatever it is, but there's a couple of key outcomes that you're looking for there, and it's designed to deal with a number of the challenges that we see in organizations not being, they maybe have tried to start experimenting before and they've not been able to get there. Okay. So I can talk to you about frameworks and the other steps, but this implementation phase is critical, because what it does is it says, what's stopping you from experimenting now? So often what we see for an example, is maybe that you've got no way to understand where the pain points are in your experience. Maybe your analytics isn't connected. Maybe you've got nothing beyond Adobe Target or GA from a quantitative point of view. Maybe it's not tagged up correctly. Maybe you've got no kind of insights capability. You've got no one asking or speaking to customers qualitatively. Maybe you've got some NPS results, but no one's actually synthesized that. You don't know anything. You don't know what's going on. So that's one thing. Then the next very common scenario is maybe you do know. Maybe you've got great insights, you've got great research, you've got great analytics. and you know that the biggest issue right now is that people can't find the right product. They don't know where to go. Like, you've got so many products and people can't find the right one, but you've got no capability for how to come up with a solution for that problem. Maybe you don't have the designers, or maybe you don't have the technologists that can deliver it, or maybe your platform is just unable to change the experience and solve that problem. So you know what the issue is, and you've got no bloody way to fix it. So that's the next really common thing, and any kind of mix of those in between. And so then you might not have enough resource. So you might say you've got both of those things, but you don't actually have anyone whose job it is to fix those issues, because they're trying to deliver to a roadmap or to a feature set, or they're trying to deliver projects which actually have nothing to do, which is really common, right? You look at organizations that are trying to roll out features. They've promised the C-suite a particular level of predicted delivery rate of projects this year. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Who's responsible for actually looking at the existing things that are delivered and having that continuous improvement mindset to the experience? Who is that center of excellence in terms of delivering and continuing to optimize, personalize, and kind of experiment with to improve all those other things? Because you can do those things on a project, but maybe not holistically. And so that's kind of, largely speaking, the big three issues that we see. And so that implementation step is designed to help set up the practices, the people. So it's an operation setup. What are the technologies? What are the testing tools? Do you have those first two things? Can you identify, and then can you come up with the right solution? Do you have the capability to do that? And then also, can you then deliver these experiments meaningfully, report on them? And those are the upper steps. So then it's really a very common, you would have any analysis to how people run testing programs. You'll see that it's like, identify, kind of ideate or design, deploy that test, and report on that test and decide what to do next. Those kind of 4 steps. And we've got our own flavors of those things. And largely speaking, they're iterated based on what happens in that implementation phase. What's the technology that you're working with? What's the political landscape? Who are the stakeholders that are going to be involved? In our case, is that going to be wholly an Isobar team that works with some stakeholders, or will it be cross? Will it be a blended team? Maybe the developers are from the client, and the designers and the analysts are from Isobar, or any mix of those things, to go and run that program. But if you don't have those setups, you'll naturally run into those other issues. Oh, we've come up with this great idea. We can't bloody deploy it and test it. So it's, a tree falling in the forest. It's not doing anyone any value.
Yeah. Okay. So you're having to sell experimentation to clients, and then help them educate them in it, and then help build a practice around their particular needs, right? So it's kind of you're getting lots of opportunity to just refine and improve this approach, which sounds good.
Yeah, and there's sort of 2 ways that's largely happened. One overtly, where it's like, hey, we're going to actually, you've asked us to come and help you build this capability, and another one which is probably more common in terms of we do a wide range of projects, and so throughout the project, we would naturally kind of drop in elements of that capability building to their team. So if we're helping you build out a new, recently we redesigned the ordering experience for a large fast food chain, both app and website. And so the project itself was deliver a new experience for ordering food and picking up food in our restaurants. But throughout that process, we need to say, like, how we, everything that we've already talked about. How do you make sure that we're making these decisions based on insight? How do we make sure that when we launch, maybe we're testing multiple versions, or starting down a path to personalization through understanding which versions of these reacted to different segments or different audiences? And so those things are baked naturally into the way that we work. And that's we can't work really in any other way. Otherwise, how do we defend design decisions or development decisions that we've made, and also plan to improve in the future? Because no matter how long the project is or how big the team is, we know that the what we deliver can be improved. And that's not a failing of us. That's because new things will change, technologies will change, situations will change, and we want to continue to react to those and improve things in the future.
Yeah. Okay. So when you look at like the design process of a circle, it's continuous, ideate, deliver, test, learn. You're really like at the start and the end of each project collecting data to then inform the next loop.
Yeah. and hopefully shorter term than that. So within the project itself, there should be loops that enable that to happen at either a sprint level, or some other cadence, maybe some phases or weekly or whatever it is, depending on how the project is run. we're very lucky and privileged to be able to work with global, national, and smaller clients, and the complete diversity in terms of where those teams are, like especially these days, where those teams are located and what they're trying to achieve, and the maturity and the capability of those teams is so necessarily widespread that some teams are able to digest or ingest insights on a 2-week basis and use those and change the feature set, or change the priority, and be I guess truly quote unquote agile. Other teams have a set of requirements they're delivering to a global roadmap, and so you can certainly still experiment within those projects, but it might be at a different cadence, and it might be that you gather insights throughout the project and then you deliver maybe a large bulk of that testing at launch at scale, but you can still do validation, usability testing, other types of quantitative testing throughout the project to validate the design decisions and mitigate that risk for launch. And that mitigating risk for launch is a really key factor that a lot of clients, understandably want that confidence that what they launch is going to work.
Yeah. Okay. So there are kind of broadly two approaches. One is that you're experimenting and you're learning, and the insights that are coming out, they feed the backlogs, which then contribute towards that particular project. And then another way is you have your UCD process, but it's tied to a roadmap. So there's on the side something ticking along that feeds in when it can, but also integrates towards the end before launch.
Yeah, and I think that largely kind of maps to agile, or like truly agile kind of product team, or I guess a more traditional project where the sets of requirements are kind of relatively fixed, and you're trying to work out the best way to deliver on those requirements. Whereas, I guess a modern, a truly modern agile team has no specific need to deliver a particular feature. And I know that that's probably not, completely honest anyway, but they're less tied to specific features, as opposed to saying, hey, we've paid you to deliver this project. To take a the fast food chain, for example, you're not really entering into, I wonder if people want to order fast food. You're trying to work, your experimentation is focused on the best version of that experience versus a mindset, and obviously it bleeds across, versus a mindset, I guess, in product development, which is, do we actually want that feature in the first place?
Yeah. Okay. All right then. So coming back to like the mindset and the education part of this, and bringing it into the practice. Did a lot of training to educate people in how to approach it. Did you find that there were particular styles of designers or skill sets that you needed to hire in? Did it change your hiring practice at all?
That's a really good question. We've been lucky to have a pretty big and diverse team since I've been at Isobar, which has been about 5.5 years now, close to 6. So I wouldn't say that it changed our hiring at all. I would say that it did open up new opportunities for members of the team. So there are certainly members of the team which are far more passionate about experimentation and leading experimentation within a project landscape. But I will be very quick to call out that I see that as a really positive thing. I don't expect everybody in the team in any aspect of the capability mix, whether that be design systems, motion design, creative execution, research and insights. I don't want, and we've talked about this very openly nationally in the team, is that we're not trying to make cookie cutter designers. A UX designer can mean such a broad, an experience designer can mean such a broad set of things. We want people to be at different, have different shapes and execute in different ways. And this is, as we develop this capability more and more, this just opened up a new area for someone to be passionate about or overtly capable within, in the same way that other things like design systems and prototyping or research have, you can recognize someone might be a research specialist or an animation specialist. And now you can recognize that somebody is, an insights and experimentation specialist. And that's a really positive thing. So, I think we've hired people who have been attracted to that capability within the organization. We haven't said we have to hire only those people. We've been lucky enough to have a good mix, pretty much organically developed.
Yeah, I think that's super important to just have a mix, lean on people's strengths and have different strengths mixes as well at times.
Absolutely.
So Are you able to talk about, you've got your experimentation practice. Is this separate from the typical design practice at Isobar, and how are they linked?
Yeah, good. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. The answer is that I think it certainly developed, that there was, because of the way that we were engaging with certain clients, where that was starting to kind of organically become more important, is that it was, it emerged predominantly through the design team. And very quickly, like all things at Isobar, we're incredibly cross-functional and really passionate about that. It's only as good as the data and the insight, and it's only as good as the experience that actually reaches the hands of users, which means that developers, the development team and the data team and strategy team need to necessarily and importantly be part of that process. And so the reason that we've used the term practice and not team is because it is a conscious decision, right? Like it is not a separate set of people. We have had situations where we have developed a specific team on projects who are responsible for that, to act as a capability or a center of excellence for that. But it's not a segregated team, and there's no walls. It's a completely permeable. Anyone is part of that practice if they're doing those things. The whole point of having the practice is to say, here are ways that we conduct experimentation, knowledge sharing, ways of working, tooling, whatever that might be. And anybody from any craft, which is what we call the disciplines at Isobar, from any craft can be part of the experimentation process. And the practice is just a way of kind of grouping all that knowledge together so everybody can access it easily.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So practice is something, because by nature it's open. It's something that people can learn, they can explore. There are no walls. You don't have to get hired onto the team. That's great. And it feeds into that upskilling the team in different ways and getting that skills mix right as well. So, I mean, I'm sure that a lot of the learnings and like the big epiphanies that you've had are kind of baked into some of the things that you've talked about already. But when you look back, what are some of the key lessons that stand out?
In terms of developing the capability within teams?
Yeah.
I think first and foremost is, why the hell are we doing this? What is the benefit of having this approach? You need to be able to communicate that really effectively. And I think, there's so many different podcasts and sort of articles and talks about this, but design needs to be able to speak the language of business. And I've personally found, and I've seen this come true, is that experimentation is inherently tied into business performance and results, whilst also very much embracing human-centered, because the human-centered aspect is like, what are those insights that you're getting from real people, and understanding what their needs are, and then seeing if you've been able to meet those needs, but then tying it intrinsically into measurable objective, so taking subjectivity, like removing subjectivity from being at the top point of that conversation from start to finish. And it should absolutely be part of that. People's feelings and ideas should absolutely be part of that. But if you're relying purely on subjectivity, then then this is a way to kind of absolve yourself of that burden as quickly as possible. And that's been really critical. This is a way to talk the language of business and speak to executives and speak to the people who are funding things, and be able to say, here is the return on investment. And that can be, that's not always a conversation that everybody, or certainly every designer, wants to have, but it's a really important one. And it's a way to kind of continually fund, user research and prototyping and, design sprints and all those things that we want to do that, we meaningfully, enjoy and we come into work to do every day. This is a way to fund those things and to make sure that we're doing something, powerful and seeing the results of those things. And as we touched on before, it's not just A/B testing. It's a whole plethora of, cornucopia of different ways to test and to validate, and that's really exciting. So I think that sort of business of language part is one really important thing, probably the most prominent one for me.
Yeah. Okay. What's the next stage of evolution, do you think, for your practice?
I think what we've managed to get to is that it's not, what's the best way to word this? I think we've removed it from being something which is, maybe we could look at doing some experimentation on this project, to what's the right, like, what do we need to experiment on? So moving that mindset meaningfully from being, or like kind of pretty, demonstrably from being, I wonder if this is the right type of project to do that, as opposed to being, it would be so weird to talk about, I wonder if this is a project we should do some design on. And so when you've got, you know what I mean? Like, that's just not a conversation that people have. And so what we think we've gotten to is by embedding, insights-led, hypothesis-driven design decisions, by having prioritization, built into every project, at both a feature, an epic, whatever that might be, in multiple different levels of the project. So having elements of what is it that we need to learn? How are we going to understand if that's been, everything is an experiment. Nothing is without the need to validate. No idea is so perfect and so brilliant, or without any ability to improve upon it, that conducting an experiment or having an experimentation mindset being brought to the table from the very start. So I think that's a really key factor. And making sure that every project does embrace that right from the start, and that it's almost invisible. Like, we talk a lot in design about, good design being invisible in many ways. And I think that if you see experimentation behaviors being exhibited by people on projects, both client and agency in our case, but anyone within the project, that's when you know that you've got a really embedded capability around experimentation. If people are naturally saying, how do we test this? How do we learn more? What don't we know? How has this changed, behavior on within the experience somewhere? When you can see those things, and they don't even necessarily know to call them, behaviors of experimentation, but they're just being exhibited. That's really successful.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a particular method of experimentation that you've yet to try out that you want to try out soon?
One that I would love to be able to do, personally, and members of the team are probably, rolling their eyes just without knowing why right now as I say this. But one type of experimentation which I haven't been able to do much, we've been able to do some, but actually the validation technique is what's called kind of Wizard of Ozing, where you fake part of that service. So you might be like, let's say that you wanted to trial click and collect. And so rather than go and build out the entire click and collect infrastructure, you might put a click and collect option on the site, but then some team members that might be connected to a Google form, and some people are then manually going and driving that, item over for pickup at a set of stores to test that idea. So you faking that service as much as possible. And why I love that is that you can take potentially massive changes to the way that the business works, or to the way that the service operates, and prototype that, not from a digital interface prototyping, but that's obviously often a very much a part of it, and completely change the surface, within days, and see whether or not that's is how are people responding to that. Yeah. And that's really exciting, and really, when you're part of that and you're on the ground and you're kind of running that, and you're seeing one of my team members, Julia Burks, they did that with an ATM, like an ATM for a bank, obviously, at a specific type of ATM, and it was really successful in terms of they physically prototyped an ATM. It wasn't a real working. Eventually it was, but initially it was like a cardboard ATM, and they put that in certain locations, and they were moving that around. And you take that from the mindset of a bank, or like a new ATM. Well, we need to go and build 10,000 of them. We need to deploy them across, across all these different branches, and there's security for the. No, whoa, back the truck up. Like, the people want to use it. Is it working correctly? And that's just the original mindset. Can we validate that that's working? So we've had the opportunity to do it, as I've obviously illustrated, but I really enjoy that. I think being able to do that more, and getting organizations to embrace, because I think they think that the risk is trying it, and what we try to talk about so much is the risk is not trying it. If you don't go and try those things, and somebody else does, as we've seen time and time again, and they get out ahead of you, and they're known for that part of the experience, you've lost that. The best that you can ever do then is meet that expectation that's now been set by different organizations who set that capability, and you're playing catch up.
Yeah. Okay. So we're really saying that some of the more creative techniques and approaches to experimentation can sometimes lead to the most creative results or insights, right?
Yeah. In fact, there's a lot of data to say that the larger the experiment, the more meaningful the insight. Everyone's heard the story of like the $1 million button. And that's not to say that, experimenting with layouts and structural changes isn't critical because it bloody well is. Like it's important to do those things. But if the only thing that you're doing is changing button color and some imagery based on what else they've clicked on, you're leaving a lot of opportunities on the table.
Yeah. If you had to pick one approach to experimentation, one technique to rely on over all the others, which one would that be?
Do you mean in terms of like a validation, in terms of A/B testing or
Yeah.
like online or something like that? Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if your approach and your methodology is sound, and by that I mean you've got a good way to understand which experiments to select. So you've got a good approach to prioritization. If you're making sure that you've got a great mix and diversity in qualitative and quantitative input into those hypotheses,
Okay.
and you've got a cross-functional team which is able to collaboratively come up with possible possible solutions or experience solutions based on that hypothesis. That's important. And then that's the most important part. And then if you're talking about if you had to choose one validation technique, and hopefully I never have to do that, then I think that from my point of view, someone who works predominantly in the digital landscape, it would be naturally, a version of ABX testing. And the reason for that is that you can validate at scale, you can get statistical significance, you can deploy to multiple places, and you can naturally turn that into personalized experiences with today's tooling in a really cohesive manner. But if I worked in healthcare, service prototyping would probably be a way to do that, potentially. But for me, in my role, working at a digital agency on apps and websites and digital products and services, it would be some kind of A/B testing.
All right. That's a good response. It gives a little bit of insight there into once you've got the hypothesis, really you want as many inputs as you can into that, and you would pick them depending on obviously the best way to solve that hypothesis.
Yeah, and we speak a lot about that. I think breaking down this concept that experimentation equals A/B testing, and we talk about personalization and optimization being types of experiments, because personalization is really just a personalized experiment. If I've got this insight about Jack, I want to know which version of this is most is going to give him the best experience, and then I'll continue to give you a version of that, and naturally, so that's just an experiment, right? It's exactly the same process, it's exactly the same concept. It's just that we start to give it to you specifically instead of a wider range of people. And I'm being maybe a bit too general, but ultimately it's within the same umbrella.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's been super insightful. We're obviously really knowledgeable and got lots of experience on it. So I think
thank you very much.
I need to go away and do a bit of reading and perhaps get more into this myself. So thanks for talking about your practice today.
Pleasure.
So that's all for this episode. Dave's obviously got deep expertise and experience with experimentation. So I think I'll have to have a follow-up with him once I'm a little further along in my experimentation journey. But I hope you got some notes and some things to go away and apply yourself. Catch you next time.